Okay, go ahead now.
Okay, well, thanks. Yeah, I just want to welcome Trenton and Dylan. I got to meet them a few weeks ago, and they can tell you more about what they're up to. But I think they're going to be a great addition to the group. And I'm finishing up the CAL FIRE project, and so I'm just going to read. I've got like 100-word little blurb here about the webinar that I'm giving. Next Wednesday, March 15th, and then the following day I'll be giving something similar to the forest group. People are welcome to attend both. They'll probably have a little bit different flavor, but so vegetation trends and cycles in fire-prone landscapes of Napa, Sonoma, and Lake counties. In this webinar, historical ecologist Arthur Dawson presents the findings of a 3-year CAL FIRE funded study tracing the story of fire and vegetation in the North Bay over the last 150 years. Integrating a wide variety of sources reveals the surprisingly dynamic patterns of chaparral, hardwood, and conifer woodlands in response to wildfire, timber harvest, and wildfire suppression. It took generations to set the stage for the catastrophic fires of the last decade. It will take several more to change that trajectory. Altering course is going to require hard work on the ground, guided by a deeper understanding of the relationship of fire, vegetation, and the role of human beings in the landscape. So that'll be my focus next time in my presentation here, and also on Wednesday, March 15th. And thanks. It was good to try it out loud. So then,
Fantastic. That's great. I'm really looking forward to it. So that'll be next month, March 16th. And next on my screen is actually Jill Butler. Hey, Jill.
Good morning, Jill Butler, representing Gualala River Watershed Council, and we are mainly working with Sonoma RCD, Ron and Jason Wells on the Gualala River Collaborative project. We had our first meeting last month, and we had 29 attendees, so we're off to a really good start. Lots of agencies and nonprofits, a lot of people from the forest group are involved with that. Judy, Kim, Shanti, I think Brooke Edwards might have been there, or at least is on our list. And I'm actually representing the forest group to that group. If any of you have input about things or ideas for the Gualala River, you can pass them along to me or any of those other representatives. And for the next meeting, the main things we're focusing on are what needs updating in the existing management plans, which are the NICWAP and TMDL documents that are 15 to 20 years old. Also, if you have any data on the Gualala River, we want to, or have done projects in the Gualala River, we hope to document that in the new updated management plan. That'll be the main product of that project. Okay, that's it for me.
Thanks, Jill. That is such a huge project. I'm excited to stay in touch and see how it goes. And all right, so next is Ron Rillary.
There we go. Jill gave you a pretty good report. We're meeting next week, and one neat, interesting thing about the funding is that they're not funding new search of data. We're searching for old data. We don't have funding to set up. Is that true, Jill? I think we're limited to existing data or stuff that people want to add to what we have.
Yeah, I think we're just trying to document what's already out there, which we suspect is a lot, and Jason will be masterminding, pulling all that together so we can hopefully see what's been done and what still needs to be done, and where to go from here.
Yeah, I heard they found some classified documents buried in Mar-a-Lago. But seriously,
And then Horicon School.
yeah. And yeah, so I think we're going to have a good attendance. I haven't heard back from Jason how many people confirm, but I expect a lot of people there. The Sonoma RCD, we're still in the process of looking for a new executive director. Can't tell you for sure who the finalists are, but we're recruiting that. I think we have a financial manager sort of narrowed down, but otherwise we haven't done much except just holding the course, So I'll have more to report next time.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome. And so just as a reminder, we're doing sort of our, for everyone new who just joined the meeting, we're doing kind of a quicker version of our updates, because I'd love to have our updates wrapped at 10:30 so we can get to the next item on the agenda. So next on my screen is Eric. And Eric, I don't think you've attended one of our meetings before. So if you don't mind giving yourself an introduction, and I'll have just a reminder too, for the benefit of everyone who's new on the call, when you give your introduction, mention, who you work for or what your affiliation is, and that'll get everyone a little more familiar with faces on the screen. Thanks.
Awesome. Yeah. Hello all, Eric Schust here. I just started for Sonoma Ecology Center last week on the handbook of principles and practices for vegetation management in Sonoma County. So I'm just kind of picking that all up and getting to know the area. I've heard about this group. I've been doing land management in Sonoma for a couple of years now, so just happy to be here. Yeah, I can't give too many updates right now.
That's great. We're excited to hear you're working on the handbook. That's a good project. Nice to meet you. All right, and I'll send it on to Trenton.
Good morning. I'm Trenton Williams. I work with a private business in Northern California called Hybrid Incident Support. We offer fire suppression, wildfire prevention planning, cultural burning, land stewardship, and traditional ecological knowledge practices. We met with Arthur. Sorry, I'm burping. With Arthur a couple of weeks ago. And we're just trying to let him know that this is what we do. We'd like to help the county and anybody else, private landholders, try to bring back these practices and steward their land better than what we've been doing in the past. So yeah, nice to meet everybody.
Wait, did you say you're burning right now?
Yeah, we burn typically up in like Tehama County and Chico area.
But
we've also done a few burns up in in Lake County.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. So really glad to have you. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And let's see, and Dylan.
Good morning, guys. Yeah, Dylan Williams, twin brother of Trenton, tribal member, Manchester Vanderpump Indians. So yeah, basically everything he said. We have experience working in tribal groups to do what we can to rehab and different plots of land, burn rehabilitation, fuels mitigation, in all manners from, mechanical fuels removal to prescribed burns to cultural burns that are more sensitive of which plants to take and which plants to leave. We have a burn coming up this weekend down in Mariposa, where we're going to, continue to learn and practice cultural burning and learning more about reseeding and being, sensitive of riparian and different sorts of environments and when to burn, when to seed, those kinds of things. So it seems like we are in line with some of the things you guys do, which is pretty exciting to see that shift in agencies and organizations towards being more eco-sensitive or at least aware of the effect that we can have on our environment.
It's really good to have you. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm looking forward to us, learning from each other and yeah, building a relationship there.
Same,
So,
same.
yeah. All right, and next is Tess.
Hi, I'm Tess. I'm an AmeriCorps Fellow with the Gold Ridge RCD in West Sonoma. And I'm mostly responsible for working on the new RCPP forestry grant through NRCS. So hopefully we'll kind of get that more up and running. I think the next batching period starts in April. But until then, I am also participating in a prescribed burn up in Hopland in Mendocino at the UCA track. So that's exciting.
Great. Thanks, Tess. And Dee.
Hi, I'm Dee Swanheiser, and I'm with this group for sure, mostly, and I'm also representing Taking Action for Living Systems. I don't have a report, and so let's just move on. I'm looking forward to our presentations and discussion.
Okay, thanks, Dee. And next is Jason.
Make sure Mills wasn't on the call. I'm Jason. I work for Sonoma RCD. Mostly doing a lot of planning stuff right now. We've got the Walla River Watershed Coalition is starting up. So that's this big planning effort, community engagement type thing, and coming up with sort of projects, and same sort of thing going on in Diamond Mountain around the Upper Mark West, and got a project I'm trying to put together for Pine Flat, which is up in the Geyserville area, and then we're going to do a similar sort of planning effort for that group of people. Each one of these planning areas is like 10,000 or so acres, and then we've got Bohemian Grove area trying to do the same thing, figuring out whether or not they're going to apply for grants this round or next round, but eventually getting to the point where we're doing some cross-boundary, larger scale planning and implementation type stuff. I think that's mostly what's taking up my bandwidth right now.
Thanks, Jason. And let's see who's next. Raymond Raycross.
Hi, Ray Kraus, Upper Mark West Watershed. Not much new, just lots of pile burning going on of down the dead burned vegetation from the glass fire.
All right. Thanks, Ray. Brooke Edwards.
Good morning, everyone. Brooke Edwards, Sonoma County Regional Parks. And we've been working in our Cloverdale River Park in Shiloh, thinning material out and doing some burn piles. So kind of getting those fuels under control and reduce some fuels going into the spring and summer. We have a draft Cal VTP finished for our Shiloh and Foothill parks. And so we're going to be reviewing that, and hopefully we'll have a finalized VTP in a month or two, and then we'll be able to start implementing that this year. And then we're also putting in for our Cal Fire wildfire prevention grant to include some shaded fuel breaks for Monorail Redwoods, and also our Mark West property. And that's a quick wrap up for us.
All right, thank you. Sophia.
Hi there. Sorry, caught me off guard a little bit. Great to be in the group, and I'm just kind of keeping my ear to the ground. As you can see, I'm with the Cooperative Extension in Marin. I do stuff with Fire Smart Landscaping, but as I've said before in this group, my heart is actually in the wildlands. So I always like to hear what you guys are up to up north, and keep apprised of what's going on in the region. So thank you very much. You're
Oh,
mute. Okay.
sorry. Yeah, you're right. Sorry. And next is Sashi.
Hi, I am also Sashi Sabarat. I'm also with UC Cooperative Extension, but in the Sonoma office. And I am the Wildfire Vegetation Mitigation Program Manager, and working with members of this group on putting the next conference together. And right now I'm really just in a big push to finish my master's thesis. So I'm like, yeah, kind of stressing out about that a little bit. Those of you who've gone through that process can send me your sympathy. The topic is how visualization can catalyze community consensus for vegetation management in Sonoma County. And I did some qualitative research with agency and landowner groups in Sonoma County, and I'm pulling that together right now. So in the home stretch, so wish me luck on all that.
So luck. All right, I think that covers everyone on the call other than our presenters. And but I'll let them go ahead and introduce themselves too. So Robert and Doug, starting with Robert.
Hi, everyone. Robert Aguero. I'm a senior environmental specialist at Permit Sonoma. I'm here to present with my project co-manager on the updates that we are proposing to the county's tree ordinances. And, you know, I'll leave it at that before so that we can share more in the presentation. But go ahead, Doug.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, everything Robert said. I'm Doug Bush. I'm a planner with the County Sonoma, Permit Sonoma, and working with Robert on hopefully doing a better job supporting forest health in Sonoma County. So we'll look forward to sharing some background on what we're doing and hopefully have some good conversations. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. All right. Well, we're ahead of schedule, amazingly. That never happens. And I guess we'll just roll on to the next item. So this is something that was rescheduled from last month. It is not meant to be that formal of a conversation, since I don't think we really have, I don't think we can really do that, but you know, at this stage with what we have in front of us. But I wanted to do more of a kind of a casual conversation about wildfire misinformation and let it be the beginning to something even more formal, in which we add on to the kind of matrix of myths and responses to those common misunderstandings that's already been started through the paper that I shared with you all in the email. I think it's something that Jason Wells shared months ago. It's a really important resource and something for us all to think about. I know we all encounter wildfire misinformation in our daily work, and the purpose of this conversation is really to get us kind of airing out, like, what are the most common things that people, you know, that we hear from the public, or that we even need some more clarification on internally. And then, you know, starting to think about, you know, do we have resources among us that can help us address what those information gaps are, or misinformation is. So like I said, like, we may not be completely ready to have like a in-depth conversation, but I just wanted to kind of start the conversation and brainstorm with you all what some of those things might be. So maybe I'll just leave it there. I'm also going to pull up the document that I had shared, and we can, if we need to look back at that, I'll screen share. Does anyone want to sort of kick us off?
Well, I'm not sure exactly how we'll kick it off, but it's you know, it is something that comes up every now and again. I think that the main issue is that most people haven't ever looked at the forest in terms of how it grows. They don't have necessarily the time frame, right, to consider how things have changed and how impacts will change in ecology over time. And that's just not even, I mean, that's not a normal conversation for most social circles. This one probably the exception to the rule, right? But so it's hard. I mean, like, I feel like the idea of doing preventative maintenance work, thinning, removal of trees is counterintuitive, right? Most people wouldn't think the idea of cutting down trees as being a good ecological thing, right? But they don't really like understand the context of the history of what this area has gone through in terms of both, you know, anthropogenic uses of fire, industrialization, overpopulation, reclamation projects, right? Like we're not dealing with some untouched wilderness, and we've got 100 years of John Muirism that has really created a narrative, right, for most people. And it's sort of like looking at Disney movies for understanding how ecology works, right? Like so it's tough, right? You're starting on a back foot. You're starting on just like having to start not only at square one, but like working on some of the inherent misinformation that people may have picked up over the course of their entire life, right? And so that's tough. There are some great resources. I mean, that was that paper that we shared that had, 30 plus fire scientists basically doing a peer review and a research, a literature review, and agreeing, and showing pretty clearly how the science is lined up for the benefits of introduced fire. But then there's one, you can share that, but then you also have to hope that whomever is receiving that has an understanding of how the scientific process works and how to take in that information. So there may be a level of public education that's, probably should have been done in high school, but isn't necessarily, not everybody's on board. So I don't know. We're probably never going to get to 100%. That's the other thing I'll say. Like, I don't think we're ever going to get 100% of people agreeing on a thing. I mean, I feel like the last 2 years have really shown us that some pretty basic common sense type stuff. Yeah. So anyway, I'm probably done. I don't know. I don't know where else to take this conversation.
You're good. I appreciate those comments. I think there's a lot you could expand, a lot more you could say about what you're seeing. But I think that's a really good place for us to start. And I see 2 hands, so I'll just let Sashi go and then Dee.
Yeah, thank you. I think Jason kicked us off well as usual, but I wanted to just kind of see if people would maybe think about framing it just a little bit differently, that it's really not just one problem that we're talking about. And I think that one of the places where people have conflicts is because they're arguing over 2 different problems. One is the risk of wildfire to communities, to people and property, to critical infrastructure. And then the second problem is sort of a general forest health problem. So this group that we're in right now was formed because of a recognition that there are a lot of smaller parcels that are owned by private individuals who don't necessarily have the wherewithal or the capacity or understanding to be able to manage their part of the forest, that they, because of decades of kind of a history of total suppression, and because of past history of logging where there might have been areas that had been clear cut and then sort of regrew, that the landscape is, just broadly kind of over vegetated. So that recognition has been, this group did that, came together for that recognition well before wildfire kind of popped up again as a problem in the public consciousness. So I think really making a point when you're framing these conversations to talk about those 2 things separately is important. And Dee has been part of the group that we've been working with, of environmental and climate activists, some of whom are very much concerned about, well, so, hey, if you're talking about wildfire, you shouldn't be talking about forest forest stuff because you really need to be talking about near home things. Well, so if you point out that those are actually two things and both things are important and need to be addressed for different reasons, then, you know, the different arguments can fit into those two buckets. Like, yes, absolutely. You know, defensible space and home hardening are incredibly important for the safety of communities. 100%. The health of the trees, the California Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force was put their recommendations together because it started out as a tree mortality task force. So, you know, that's also a problem. So just want to see what people think about it. Is that it's really just starting with, you know, recognizing that there's more than one problem.
Thanks, Sashi. I'll go to Dee and then maybe take a pause, see if there's any responses to what Dee and Sashi say before I go on to Jason.
Here we go. So I kind of wonder if the word misinformation is the right word to describe what we're experiencing and what people that have different opinions are experiencing, because I think there are many sides that are still trying to figure out this critical time of our lives. What we decide to do now is going to point to how the next 20 years unfold, whether it goes to a more cataclysmic situation, or whether we're going to have some modification of climate and wildfires, droughts, floods. And I think the science is not exact. It is not, it's adaptive. Science is adaptive, and we need to learn from how we do things and what we've done in the past and how we surmise what we should do next. The scientific community is not of one opinion. And so it's especially hard for us citizen scientists and private landowners to figure out what is the best way, you know, to go forward. And my sense is that the work of all of us is to listen, learn, cross-fertilize, and not be assured that we have the answers, and to honor all of the people that are trying their very best to get at this problem, so that we aren't wasting our time fighting or, you know, continuing to go down the path of division. I think that's, to me, so I think it goes pretty far beyond misinformation. I think maybe it's okay to call it that for now, certainly, but I'm just saying that we have a lot of relationship building and we have a lot of work to do because we don't have time. Time is not on our side, and I'll stop there.
Thanks, Dee. I think you made a really good point about science as an ongoing process. Definitely. And we need to, I think you're right about honoring the fact that, you know, we're all sort of learning together. I guess just to ground our conversation, I am going to share my screen and show you guys the table that I mentioned before, and we'll just run through a couple of examples just to sort of like frame this conversation. So this is the table produced by Jones and other researchers just this past year, and you can see that there's the information statement is what we're calling it here, with the description, the consequence of that misinformation, how the information from more robust knowledge frameworks that can be used to sort of respond to the initial misinformation, and then the resources. So the first one, I'm not going to go through all the columns, but example of misinformation statement is contemporary wildfires are normal. Another example is forests are resilient and will naturally recover from disturbance like wildfire. Another one is fuel reduction treatments are ineffective or possibly even, negative. Another one is fuels reduction is a Trojan horse for commercial logging. I think we hear a lot of that one in our county. Contemporary wildfires are beneficial to wildlife. And then they list the resources below. So this is just kind of a starting place, but those are, and I'll stop sharing. Those are, some examples of the statements that I think we all kind of run up against, and we are all asking ourselves like, oh, how do I respond to this in a way that I know will be really beneficial for the conversation I'm having with this person and will help to explain, not validate, but explain the approach behind, what management approach we're suggesting, for example. Okay. I'll just stop there. So did anyone want to respond to anything that Sasha or Dee said before we move on to new comments?
Yeah. Hello?
Yes.
This is Ray. I think the word apprehension comes to bear here. I think there's an apprehension. People are apprehensive that somehow vegetation management is a euphemism for over harvesting or destroying the forest, and largely the people that hold this apprehension are people that are least familiar with being out on the landscape. But I want to thank Arthur and suggest Arthur is on a good path here. I think one of the things that's overlooked in these discussions is that vegetation management is very site specific and very habitat specific, and people are applying their experience in a particular location to the entirety of veg management, and consequently what they see going wrong in one place may be the perfect treatment in another, and they don't actually understand that. And the other is I don't think there's a great appreciation of the ecological history of these areas to understand how they evolved, how human interaction with the forest has shaped it historically, how dramatically that human interaction has changed with the demise of our indigenous people, and what a deficit we have in management as a consequence that needs to be caught up, and the management that needs to be done today is not necessarily the management that's going to continue 10 years or 20 years or 30 years down the road. So site specific and ecological history, I think, are pieces that are helpful in sorting through this conversation.
Thanks, Ray. All right. Okay, well, I'll just go on to the next hand raised, which is Jason Mills.
Hey guys, yeah, I think that was a great comment there. To me, I feel like a lot of people have the blinders on, and a lot of people have different perception of what's going on. But having studied vegetation and worked in vegetation management for 20 years in the Bay Area, it's frustrating to me to see how some of these blanket prescriptions are applied to forest management, right? If we look at forest management practices for timber harvest, can that really be applied to every forest in Sonoma County? I mean, we have plenty of timber harvest available in the northwestern portions of the county, but within the rest of Sonoma County, we have like largely hardwood forests with Douglas fir encroachment that have little to no timber value. I don't see where traditional forest management plans and ideologies that are shaped by CAL FIRE grants doing the work in the Sierra, the yellow pine forest there loaded with timber, apply at all to our mosaic of vegetation here on the Coast Range. And if we look, just like Raymond was saying, we have a variety of ecological communities. Each one of them needs their own prescription. And we're not dealing with a textbook situation here What we have here on the Coast Range is 400 years of us altering and introducing foreign plants. And these invasive species are dominant vegetation in many of our forests. And I don't understand, and pose a significant fuel threat. And for some reason, invasive species are completely left out of the conversation, or at most a fringe effect. And what this is doing is very detrimental to our fuel reduction projects that are now underway. I have yet to see a fuel reduction project done properly. All I see is sloppy work, and this is my perception. And it's tragic because what we've done is we're hiring tree companies to do work on woody vegetation with no work or consideration to the understory. And the disturbance is leading to a proliferation of ladder fuels and hampering biodiversity. So if I was a member of the Sonoma County general public, I would be really upset to see the sort of work that's gone on. And frankly, I would want to put a stop to it until I see it done right. And I feel like it's our responsibility to weigh in and see this work done properly. And the project I just went to go see on Cavedale Road, it's just like it. You could see it's going to happen from the moment it's happening. The tree company goes down, limbs up all the woody vegetation, mows all the broom. Well, guess what? 3 years later, there's 5-foot understory thick of broom about to dump millions of seeds into that canyon, and we're going to have a much worse fuel situation than we had before we spent all the money for it. So that to me is just not okay, and I would love to see these practices change.
Can I say something real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
You guys can hear me. This is Dylan Williams. Just to give you some hope, building on what you're saying. So the organizations that we work with, this is so us at Hybrid Incident Support, are doing exactly everything that you're not seeing with these organizations in Sonoma County, in that we are trying to, from our native background, we are doing what we can to remove the invasives and replace them with native species. That's our whole thing, is trying to rehabilitate the land back to where it was before all these invasives came in, before we've stopped, indigenous people from doing our prescribed burns and our cultural burns. It's so, I look forward to working with you guys, because the more I listen, the more it seems like we are all pointing at the same target. So yeah, it's really exciting. But just to, provide some hope, there are our group and a few other groups out there who are doing just that and working to try to create a change in our interaction with the environment, and trying to rehab and bring it back to where, a more healthy and original state.
Awesome, thank you. Any other responses to Jason's comment? And I think the misinformation that I gathered from your comment, Jason, is that the fuels reduction projects themselves are misguided, and that's a source of misinformation. And yeah, okay.
I'd like to jump in, Trent Williams, on what everyone was saying, Dylan, Jason, everybody. And yeah, piggyback on what Dylan was saying. And Jason, I feel the same way you feel. I was down at Howarth Park the other day, watching them do their fuels reduction, and just like, bam, this is ridiculous. Like, this is going to come back in a couple of years. Like, this is not helpful at all. But yeah, when it comes to misinformation, it sounds like everyone's circling on the idea that, the public's ignorant, the government's ignorant. There's this ignorance here. No one knows what the history is here and what practices have been done. And people think of us as Native Americans as, hunter-gatherers, but really we were long-term cultivators. It was cultivation on multi-year levels. We would go and, help the acorn grow. We'd go and, burn so we could get our food back and our tools back, and we would move around. And that sort of history hasn't been communicated, one out of, reluctance of Native people, because we've been burned so many times, and we're not invited to the table to speak. And then the people who are getting invited, they've got limited knowledge, because, the people who are being chosen aren't necessarily being vetted properly. They may look the part, but they actually don't know. So that's been a huge issue I've seen with working with government agencies and CAL FIRE and these people who want to do right by the land and heal the land. but just haven't been able to do it because of this lack of communication and this ignorance between these various, entities. And and yeah, so like I wanted to piggyback on Dylan saying there is hope, there is opportunity. I will put like our contact information because we want to help Sonoma County in California, start to really cultivate its land like we used to and protect homes, protect, resources, protect and use what we have here in a better way. Yeah, just want to say that.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
all great comments. All
Mind
right.
if I jump in?
Oh yeah, go for it.
So I just want to say I really appreciate all the comments that have been coming out, and I totally agree with, it's very, very nuanced. It's very place specific. I did see there was one quote on that chart of misinformation that forests are resilient after fire, and I think we would if we just say that's misinformation, I think that's ignorant in its own way. I think we need to be careful. I mean, the research that I'm doing, which I'm still pulling together, would suggest that there's some places forests are very resilient after fire. And probably there's a lot of factors there, but I would say we shouldn't just say that's misinformation. And I also wanted to just mention, kind of coming back to Trenton and Dylan's comments. So as part of this project, I got to talk to Clint McKay, who's on the Native Advisory Council at Pepperwood. And one of the things he told me was that in the old days, and we're talking about, pre-white arrival, more or less, that the fir trees were all mostly on the tops of the ridges. And that's because they were burning, from the bottom of the slope up, and it killed off the seedlings that might come down from the trees on the top. So the firs were mostly clustered up near the tops of the ridges. And what's been really interesting is looking at this suite of historical data, starting in the 1870s and coming right up to the present, to the 2013 veg map. And there is strong evidence that, the fir trees have been moving down slope. So they've been increasing their elevational range, from maybe, let's just say 1,000 feet to like 2,000 or 3,000 feet of elevation range. They're expanding onto all aspects of the landscape. And so, I'm not a fire specialist, but it suggests to me that I know, Mark Tuckman did some analysis of fire severity after the 2017 fires, and so he had data showing that like Douglas fir forest had a higher fire severity than oaks. So if the Doug firs are moving down slope into the oaks, which we know that's happening, then I would guess that's increasing fire severity. And that might be a place where we could combine the forest health with fire protection. But anyway, just as a long-term perspective, that seems to be happening, that the Doug firs have been moving down. And I think most of us have seen this. I've been places like in Annandale where there's dead chaparral under dying oak trees under healthy Doug fir. So that seems like a very there's strong evidence that's happening. And then I guess the question is, do we want to try to push the Doug firs back uphill again? So I'll leave that to other people, but that's one thought.
That's a perfect description of Mark West watershed and the glass fire.
Okay, thank you, Ray. Thank you, Ray and Arthur. And I still see Ray, Arthur's, and Trenton's hands raised. So I don't know if you guys have additional comments or if those are still left up from your.
I'm done, sorry.
Okay, no worries. Okay, any other thoughts? I like Arthur, thank you for bringing that up, that forests are resilient in some cases not, and we need to really protect them and care for them, but in some cases they are. And so there's a lot of nuance. And I guess part of what this document makes me think of is that words are really important, and we just have to be very careful, and that always requires taking more time and more words. But if we're willing to do that, I think we'll get more nuanced ideas across. Any ideas or just comments? I mean, we can continue down this line of thinking, but I also just want to maybe open up another one, which is just how do you do education in your job, and how can are there resources that can help your educational process? I'm thinking of Brooke and other landowners who interface with the public a lot and may have, you know, education hurdles to.
I have a comment. I just
Oh, go ahead.
started up for now, but I've removed probably Scotch broom from about 80 acres of property, and it's hard. And I did it without, you know, sprays and all that. Actually, I did revert to some of this after, but it took 3 to 5 years because the seeds keep coming up, and it's like constant vigilance. And I took care of my property, but the people next door to me didn't. So it doesn't take long. And working with the RCD and NRCS and all, the amount of grant money, if you want to buy a fire truck, real easy, get fire trucks, get airplanes, get, you know, giant equipment, and, you know, it pencils out, you know, but to pay people for vigilant support and getting a group, like a lot of your grants require a certain minimum acreage, and unless you get 4 or 5 neighbors to agree on what treatment you're going to use, it's hard to actually do anything. I mean, there's star thistle, there's so many things up there that if everybody got together, they could eliminate it from a certain sector based on maybe it'll stay clean for a number of years, but you can't do it 30 acres at a time. It's just, and you come to residential when you've got much more, you know, getting cooperation and then getting funding. It's easier to get a helicopter than it is to get removal. Anyway, that's my only comment. Just seeing all these grant proposals and nobody gets one for, you know, Arundo, or, you know what I mean? All these different things. It's a too big of a project, but they'll buy big tanks and guns and all to get rid of it, but they won't rely on people to get together. And I think that, like you're talking, education is key. Everybody's got to be in on it. Not easy. It's hard to recruit.
Definitely. Thanks, Ron.
Yeah, I can chime in a little bit on some of the outreach and environmental education. And really, whenever any one of us are addressing the public, you know, we're educating them about the environment. And what we always try to start with is context. And everyone, you know, that just spoke talked about that, the context of what we're working with. What they believe the forest to be is what they've seen it in the last 20 years, maybe. And that's just a snapshot. The forests have changed drastically. And so whenever we're working, we try to set that context. You know, what do these forests look like under indigenous land management? You know, they looked very different. And then, but some people go to the point of, well, these forests and landscapes are resilient because there was fire out here. But of course, those conditions have changed since, you know, 400 years ago, huge fuel loads. And so whenever I try to engage the public, I try to set that context of what these forests were like, how they were managed before, how these fuel loads have built up, how climate change has exacerbated everything, and how we are trying to move back towards some kind of balance of fuel loads, so that when we have a forest fire that's going to come through these ecosystems, and they will, it's not going to be catastrophic. It's not going to be stand replacing. Some of these forest pockets and stands will be resilient to that fire. And that's because of some of these practices that we're implementing out on the ground. We're reducing a lot of those ground or surface fuels, which can really generate a lot of heat. It can lead to those canopy fires, which end up being stand replacing. So we're always trying to set that context. And I think each time any one of us go out there, you know, we're trying to educate the public. And even though they might not understand the complexity right then and there, hopefully you're kind of planting a seed that they'll think about. So in my work, we've done workshops out at the Jenner Headlands where we're putting in shaded fuel break, we're applying prescribed fire, again, setting the context and then talking about the different stages of fuel reduction that we're going through on the Jenner Headlands, and that our initial first and second phase might look heavy-handed. However, we're just trying to get these fuel loads in some kind of balance so that we can really move towards using prescribed fire or whatever is appropriate for that ecosystem as that land management tool, so that we're not necessarily have to go in there each time with chainsaws and cutting trees down. Hopefully, in the Doug fir redwood hardwood mix that we have up there, hopefully in 10 years, really it's just applying fire every 10, 15, 20 years, whatever is appropriate. But those first initial entries do look a little bit heavy-handed, and they kind of need to be to try to get that fuel load in some kind of balance so that we can then apply prescribed fire in a safe way, in an efficient way, and in a routine way. And so setting that context, people have the thought of, like Jason said, the John Muir concept where, Europeans came to California and it was a park-like setting. Of course, it was park-like because it had been managed to that effect. And then just touching on what Sashi was saying, some folks are saying that, these forests are resilient, they can handle the fire, and so that we should just do home hardening, and that's going to protect our home. It's like, yeah, that will help protect your home. But this group is actually looking beyond that. We're also trying to protect the forests so that they're not reduced to ash, and so that they don't have this change to a different ecosystem type where they turn into chaparral or they turn into grassland because of that heavy fuel loads, because of sterilization of the soils. And so what we're really focused on is, yes, you need to do the home hardening, but we're actually trying to bring back some balance to fuel loads in our forests. And actually our work is going to help make them more resilient to these wildfires that will move through these ecosystems. So just some thoughts that stream of consciousness here I want to share.
Thanks, Brooke. And as a last note, the home hardening is super important, and it protects forests from home fires too, right? It's like both and. And I do think it's really important to talk about them both at the same time, because we have so much wildland right in our face in our county. It's like you can't really talk about one without talking about the other in a lot of cases. Sashi, did you want to respond or separate comment?
Well, maybe, yeah, kind of separate. Maybe let Dee go, and then I just want to.
Okay, you were invoked, so I just want to make sure you had a chance. Okay, Dee.
Yes, we need to, and I think because of these conversations, not just with our group, but within several groups, it is coming to a more common understanding of what we do agree on and what we don't agree on, and then how do we manage what we don't agree on? How do we come to resolve in some fashion? So I think that all these conversations, while sometimes it seems ineffective, that's how humans change, is through stories, through education, through sharing. And so I really appreciate all of it, even though it does take a lot of time. I also would like to hear from Robert at what the county does when it's, in their mind, they come across people that are relying on misinformation. I'd really like to hear how much of it you're experiencing, and how can we help the conversation continue at the county level.
Would you like, Adriana, would you like me to address that question now?
Sashi, do you want to pop in first?
Yeah, I'll just do a quick I just went through and kind of refreshed myself on the, the state wildfire and forest resilient action plan. And it might be actually a good exercise to kind of go through that in this group and kind of see how it maps down to the concerns everybody's talking about, because some of the concerns from these sort of no touch folks are based on those state goals. And the big picture is that that whole project is, trying to get more forest management, in on the land and to treat more acres. And so there's a concern for people like, oh gosh, how are those acres going to be treated? What are people going to do? Jason Mills just brought up all this, these problems that he's seeing. So maybe that would be a good thing to do in the future, would be to kind of do a quick flyover that state plan and, kind of how some of those things fit in, because there's, there are grants that are associated with those that are coming down, there are programs that are associated with that. And those are things that some of the local activists are concerned about.
Okay, very good. Thanks, and Sashi, let's continue with that for a future meeting. That'd be great. All right, go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, so just to respond to Dee's question about how does the county, what happens if we encounter misinformation and what that, how does that inform decision making? I'll stay because I'm here representing the county today. I will be diplomatic about this answer. But I do believe, in the realm of how we encounter public comments on projects and on initiatives, I really do believe all public comment is important and helps inform the policy decisions, across the spectrum, especially as we're going to talk about the tree ordinance today and other tree related initiatives. And I truly do believe, the full conservation side as well as the full pro management side. I think like that whole spectrum of comment is very important in informing decision making. And I am lucky that I am not a policymaker or a decision maker. So my job is to just convey the information that we receive, the research that we have done, my own, convey my own professional opinion as a forester, to the policymakers for them to make the decision. And if like true misinformation is encountered, like being able to objectively stand against that or like speak truth into what the truth is. For example, we've heard concerns that some of the county's vegetation management initiatives are going to be, funding timber operations, and legally we just can't do that because that's not our realm, and we're not funding timber harvesting as part of our vegetation management projects. Those are two separate legal pathways. That's in CAL FIRE's realm. We're not funding forest practice rules projects, and so that's an example of where something that is not misinformation, like truly, but like in the sense of like that particular example, like that's just not going to happen. So being able to explain that objectively, but I think in this realm of broader opinions and, like Dee said earlier, there is not scientific consensus, and being able to convey, the full spectrum of scientific consensus is our job, our difficult job as planners and county staff. So that would be my response. Doug, do you want to add anything to that? You probably, because you work on development projects unrelated to forests and trees, you probably have some, opinions as well about what, when you encounter sort of like that spectrum of consensus, I guess.
Yeah, I just start by saying I really enjoy this conversation and the perspectives and experience, everything I'm hearing. It's fantastic because I think it's a fascinating issue and it is so complex. And the thing I keep coming back to is there's a lot of false dichotomies in this topic. Fire is good. Fire is bad. There's a right way, there's a wrong way. And that kind of makes sense that often these topics in the public realm get turned into just, are you for option one or option two? And there's no nuance. I think it seems like one of the challenges that we're discussing is how to acknowledge, discuss, and integrate this idea of nuance that there are different treatments that are, one might be right in one area and wrong for another. There's no, it's not simple. So that it's not very profound, but I guess I'm struggling with this. I keep hearing this theme of these kind of false dichotomies, and I think that that's really interesting. And I've thought a lot about the wave of public opinion on, like, fire. Of course, fire is bad. Of course, fire is bad, because fire is painful. It hurts, and a tree was there and the fire came through and now the tree's not there. So this must be a bad thing. And I've seen, I feel like, more of a public understanding that there's more to it than that. So I think that that's fascinating, but I appreciate the conversation. I'm sure we'll touch on this in the context of what we're going to talk about too. And I look forward to kind of bringing them all together. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And on that note, I think, we're at 11. We need to transition to our next topic, but this has been a really good conversation. I have some good notes. If you want to continue to talk about this, we can absolutely, use our listserv, send some emails or specific, or we can make time for it at the next meeting to continue it. Just let me know if you'd like that to happen. Send me an email. But otherwise, I feel like we have a really good start here. So I'm going to pass it off to Robert and Doug, and I think I have made it so you can share your screen. So you guys have something, an experience prepared for us in which he will educate and interview us. So I'll just let you guys take it away.
All righty. Thanks so much. We gave some introductions at the beginning, but I'm Doug Bush. I'm a planner with Permit Sonoma, County of Sonoma. And I'm joined by Robert Guerrero, who's co-managing the project with me, and he's a registered forester and a natural resources specialist with us. So we'll both kind of do a song and dance here. But the real reason we're here is because we are engaging in outreach with diverse stakeholders on what has become kind of a multi-pronged project to reevaluate the county's own approaches to tree protections and kind of oak woodland protections, and looking at the gap between county policies, what we say we want to do, what we want to achieve, and then some of our actions, things like our zoning ordinance and some of our regulations that implement those policies, seeing where the gaps are, kind of looking at them in fresh light and in light of recent wildfire and 20, 30 years of new information since these things were put into place, and sort of saying, okay, where are we now? How do we do better? Where are we doing well? Where are we not doing well? I'm going to share my little presentation here, and then we'll get it going. Okay. So everybody's seeing my screen, I assume. Yeah. Okay. So this is really kind of an oversimplified presentation. Don't mean to insult your intelligence here, since all of you folks are very familiar with a lot of the issues that we're addressing, but this was developed for a broad audience. So this is sort of boiled down to county policies, existing policies, call for protection of trees and local forests, and increase carbon sequestration in many forms. We're talking general plan is the big one. It's the county's major land use policy document, and that has a number of policies calling for protection of native trees. We have found that many implementing ordinances, the zoning code, these local regulations do not do what the general plan and other policies are calling for. So we are in the position of trying to come up with updates or new regulations that improve our implementation of these policies. And I do want to acknowledge, listening to your introductions at the beginning of the meeting, everyone's approaching forest health and forest issues from all these just diverse angles. And I want to acknowledge that this is a very complex topic, as complex as our environment. And we are coming from it from one of those many potential approaches. So we're on the regulatory side of things. We're not in the business, at least in the planning land use realm, of active management. We're coming from a regulatory side of things. So I just want to acknowledge the limitations of that and kind of the limitations of our scope. So what we see here is not intended to do it all. It's just intended to ideally facilitate everything that everyone else is working on. Hopefully getting in the way of the bad and getting out of the way of the good. That's what we're hoping to do. I'm also not here, we're not here to try to sell you anything. We're in the process of developing these things, and we have some questions that we'll get to in just a moment to kind of support conversation, but we're really looking for honest feedback, concerns, like unintended consequences, this sort of thing, so that we can make the best recommendations possible and consider the broadest range of options when we go to Planning Commission and later the Board of Supervisors with some potential updates. We have been to the Planning Commission and to some local committees for their kind of preliminary recommendations. I am happy to say that in large part, the Planning Commission thus far has said, we want to do better in protecting native trees and oaks and oak woodlands. Some of the ways that they have suggested we might do that is to update our tree protection ordinance. This is the tree protection ordinance doesn't really protect trees despite its name. It's a permissive ordinance. It allows for removal of trees. Rather, it addresses whether or not a project that will be removing trees will have to mitigate by planting new trees or paying a fee to the county to support tree planting by the county. So it's really a question of, should a project have to mitigate or not? It's not a question of, should the tree removal be allowed or not? So given that.
Yeah, Doug, could I add something about that real quick? So the way the code is currently written for the tree protection ordinance, it's in our zoning code. And so to note, county projects are not subject to the provisions of the zoning code. So that's sort of like the first caveat for the tree protection ordinance. The next caveat is, as it's written right now, the applicability of the tree protection ordinance only applies to what are called development permits, which are then further defined as discretionary development permits. So these are typically going to be like use permits, design review permits, any type of permit that has some sort of discretionary element. So zoning permits, ministerial grading permits, building permits, those, as the code is written right now, the tree protection ordinance does not apply to those. And so I just wanted to sort of set that framework and that background. And Jason, before you lean in, timber harvesting also is not applicable. The tree protection ordinance does not apply to timber harvesting as well. It's really written as like a one-to-one individual tree, like mitigation style ordinance instead of like a forest level ordinance.
I just wanted you to repeat one more time, what were ministerial permits that you were listing off? So not subject to this.
Right. So zoning permits, unless there's a discretionary element involved. So for example, like design review would be like a zoning permit that has a design review element would apply. The tree protection ordinance apply. Grading permits, building permits. So included in the zoning permits would be some of our riparian corridor zoning permits and our timberland conversion zoning permits as well. So yeah.
These are all check boxes.
Yeah.
Check the box and pay the fee.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and it's an important distinction. Thanks for making that clear, Robert. So one of the main changes.
Doug, actually, can I just pop in and maybe you could clarify, and this is just coming from having been 7 years on a city council. So the state has over the last few years, in an effort to increase housing production, has made more and more local decisions ministerial. And so I don't know if you want to maybe touch on that a little bit too, that there are things that maybe were able to be discretionary from the local government standpoint that are not anymore, that might be in this.
Yes. So really in a nutshell, what this means is that the vast majority of permits and development activities that come through Permit Sonoma are not discretionary and historically have not been subject to this tree protection ordinance. In the future, the Planning Commission is now recommending that this applies to all activities that involve the removal of native trees of a specific DBH. So they have proposed to expand the list of trees that would be addressed here. Majority of native tree species, reduce the protected diameter from 9 to 6 inches, and yeah, big picture, apply this to all tree removal projects. The other thing is that historically the one of the only exemptions in the ordinance, other than that big distinction between discretionary and not discretionary permits that now may be erased, is that agricultural activities historically have not been subject to this, meaning agricultural activities that involve the removal of trees, other than those that might be through a separate kind of grading and drainage VESCO permit, are not required to mitigate for tree removals. So that is also something that the Planning Commission has asked us to reconsider. And so I'm going to jump into some of these questions. Maybe Robert, if you wanted to take it from here.
Yeah, so Adrian, I'm not sure what the best way to handle this would be with this large group. We have 4 questions related to the tree protection ordinance, and then we have 4 questions related to another initiative of this project that we'll get to in the second half. But I can just run through these questions. That's how we've been doing it with our individual and small group stakeholder meetings. And then maybe we can just, yeah, let it flow. I would love to have some form of dialogue if that's needed. And I like Jason's comment right now, just if you just want to reply in the chat for something simple, like that's great too. So I guess, would that be a good way to handle it? Just me asking all the questions first and then letting it go for like
great.
20 minutes or something. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So these questions we developed sort of to try to cover like broad, stakeholder groups. So I'll just run through them. First question, does your work involve tree removal or tree protection activities? Second question, under what circumstances should trees be protected from agricultural activities? Our third question, would current mitigations like replacing trees elsewhere on a property be feasible for you? If not, what would be a reasonable mitigation? And then 4, how would your work be impacted by the Planning Commission's proposed revisions? So happy to just let it flow at this point.
And also general impressions, skepticism, any sort of feedback is really welcome.
Yeah, fatal flaws that you've already seen, please.
I mean, I guess I'll just throw out my opinion that I think that the biggest concern right now when it comes to tree removal and the need for a tree ordinance is in conversion. I think that it's a glaring hole that there's an exemption entirely for agriculture when, as I see it, as a native, I mean, I grew up in this area. I know what it used to look like and what it looks like now. There's a lot more vineyard, right? I think that is probably your biggest threat to trees and to woodlands in the county. Mm-hmm. And I don't necessarily like the idea of the county having an ordinance or a tree protection based on DBH for all tree removals. I would prefer that when a permit is applied for, that would involve the conversion of timberland or woodland or whatever, such as building housing, building, like something to where the footprint is not capable of growing trees anymore, right? That the county look at that permit. And I would even say, look back 5 years. I mean, we have aerial photography that goes on constantly, right? Like you would be able to then at that time see whether or not someone preemptively converted their timberland or their, agricultural land or whatever, so that when they go to the permit, they say, oh, there's no big trees here, right? Like, I think at that point, that's when the investigation should happen. But to say preemptively, you need to file a permit with a permit filing fee, and we need to waste someone at the county's time for every time someone wants to cut a tree that's bigger than 6 inches, drives me crazy, personally. So that's where I'm at. That's my personal opinion on the matter. I want to target what I mean, that's what I feel is the root cause of the issue, not people just going running out willy-nilly with a chainsaw and cutting down blue oaks, right? Like, but they do want to put their vineyard in, or they do want to build a new swimming pool, or they do want to build a home, and like, I think it's the county's responsibility to be more selective and more thoughtful about where they're permitting any of these sorts of activities than maybe they have in the past, right? Because like there's all these times I go and I see these houses that got permitted and they're literally in a creek. They're like right there. So, and then even to that effect, I know how hard it is to buy a home, right? Like it's not an easy task. And so I would also request that the county do some serious planning about what is in their 50-year general plan, right? Like, where are we planning on building housing to meet the demands of people? And then maybe we have different processes for those areas where we have decided that we need to build housing to meet the needs of the community, but then out in, Mark West, way out St. Helena Road, right? Like maybe that has a different way that we handle permitting for development than it is in, say, Roanoke Park, right? So that's my 2 cents on that. But I hate the idea of having to permit for every time that I do stuff. And I'll say this: if you do have to end up going that way, please carve out exemptions for anything prescribed by a registered professional forester.
And that topic of appropriate exemptions, where to draw the line between when you're coming through the county for this process and requiring mitigation and when you're not, that's also something that we'd love feedback on. So
yeah. And then the way the ordinance is operationalized, you don't have to get a permit if you are removing these trees. It's the provisions of the ordinance apply if your project involves the removal of trees. So say you're getting a use permit for like a winery that is incidentally removing like 5 or 6 protected trees. Then you have to incorporate into your project description either replanting those trees or paying in lieu fees. And so it's not necessarily a permit for those tree removals. It's added on conditions to your project that you are getting a permit for, specifically related to trees, if that makes sense.
And then I just wanted to speak to your comment about this. Sounds like the overarching concern is type conversion and just conversion of existing woodlands. And that is something that we'll address in the second part of our chat here about oak woodland conversion ordinance. That's looking at that hopefully in a bit more effective way than this kind of 1-by-1 approach of the tree protection ordinance.
Yeah, I'd love to ask a couple of quick questions. So my understanding is this mitigation is like a 1-to-1 ratio. Is that correct? Like if you take out a tree, you have to plant one more tree?
No, so that was I think that was me misspeaking, just sort of like giving an example of like how the ordinance like works, but really the way it is, it's a weighted mitigation is what it is. So I'm looking at our ordinance right now. So the I'll see if I can share my screen actually. Let's see, screen 1. Okay, so is everyone seeing like our code right now? So this chart right here, if you're seeing my mouse, this is one of the tables that can be used for determining your mitigations. So it's broken down into diameter classes. And so if you remove a protected tree in the 9 to 15-inch diameter class, you would put in a 1, the weighted value. Your arboreal value, which is this sort of like archaic term that they created back in the 90s, would be like you would get 1 point. And then like if you're removing one over 33, a tree over 33 inches, then you multiply that times 5, and then you have 5 arboreal value points. Then you scroll down, and then depending on how many arboreal value points you have, that will tell you what the mitigation is. So 1 arboreal value point is 6 5-gallon trees, or two 15-gallon trees, or $200. So hypothetically, say you are doing 5 arboreal value points. So say you took out that 33-inch tree, you would have to do 30 5-gallon trees, or 10, right? Yeah, 10 15-gallon trees, or $1,000. So that's sort of like the weighted scale of
That makes
the mitigation.
sense. So then my next question is, where does the valuation come from, and how do you value basically the ecosystem services that are lost while those trees are rerouting and filling in a space of a large tree that was totally inundated into the ecosystem? Yeah, I guess, like, where does $400 come from? Because that's a tree 15 to 21 inches, is a large tree.
Right.
$400 seems a little bit, dare I say, a little bit bunk as a valuation.
Yes, to answer your question, it does not incorporate those considerations because this was written in the 90s. And that is a great point of feedback that we would love to incorporate into really like the efficacy of this ordinance as we bring it into, the 21st century at this point. But yeah, to really, like, it was truly written as just like this development style ordinance at the time when people weren't even talking, at least in the construction world and development world, about ecosystem services. And so that's a great point that I appreciate you bringing up.
Yeah, cool. That was all I had. Thanks.
And while we're talking about ecosystem services, I mean, even if we are thinking that this is purely for development, I just think that we should be trying to design future development around some of these features, right? Like, how can we be talking about retaining some of these legacy features as much as possible? Because, like you say, I mean, that 15-inch tree could have took 60 years to get that big, and that's not something that you're going to replace at Home Depot, right? So like, there's all kinds of studies being done on more urban type things, right? Like just the benefit of having trees near where people are living. So that's a little outside of my personal scope. I like to think more about the landscape, the forest, but that's probably something that should be considered as well when even accepting development permits. Especially if you have discretion over the way that the permit is being drawn up, then use that discretion effectively and actually have an influence on how the new future development is designed, rather than just coming up with a check down box. I mean, it almost looks like it's trying to be a ministerial permit when it's like, if you have discretion over the project, use it.
Point taken, and that is that distinction between how this ordinance would behave for ministerial actions versus discretionary is something that will be made in the ordinance. So in cases of where we are processing discretionary permit, I would love to see findings that have to be made about avoidance and minimization of impacts, show that there are no other feasible, locations for a structure, or that involve less removal of mature trees, that sort of thing. So yes, we can make that distinction in the ordinance. It attempts to do that in kind of a half-hearted way currently, but that can be improved.
Yeah, I just had one more aspect of question. Is there anything that's, any points that bring up like what's untouchable? Is there anything that's untouchable? Say like a massive old growth tree. I see you can like max out at 5 points. Is there anything that says actually you can't touch that at all? Or could that be added? Okay.
Yeah, there's nothing as it is written right now. There is nothing that technically would make something untouchable.
Interesting.
Okay. If that's something that you're interested in seeing, there are ways of potentially achieving that. An ordinance could set thresholds. Some jurisdictions will have a heritage tree kind of definition where it's above a certain size. Then therefore it requires a use permit, something that kicks it into a different process that allows more consideration and more community involvement in considering the value, the historic value, the cultural value, other things like that.
I have a question here. Right now, PG&E is down at the corner of Dewar and Hart Lane, removing a 50-year-old Monterey pine on the corner. It died, and now they're cutting it down. And on my property, there was 2 trees. Now there's 36 trees, and I've got a few that are 4 or 5 feet in diameter. I'm going to keep those, but what about if you planted the tree? Do you have the right to cut it down? I just don't know where the line goes. And I think about street trees. When I used to contract downtown, the city of Santa Rosa required me to plant trees that later on broke up the sidewalk and all that. So how does that work with? They may be a native tree, but they were planted by the wrong person in the wrong place.
Yeah. So the way the ordinance is written at this moment is you only would need to replant or protect the tree if you were getting some type of permit that the ordinance applied to. So the ordinance is actually very, landowner friendly, where, if you need to incidentally take down some native trees on your property, you can do that, right? For whatever reason. But if you have to get like a discretionary permit that then is subject to the provisions of the ordinance, then that's when the tree protection ordinance would kick in as it's written right now. I think we're trying to really figure out what the best way to keep that flexibility moving forward is. And, these conversations are very helpful in fleshing that out. Does that answer your question, Ron?
Yeah, I think it's between you and your insurance company if your tree isn't taken down properly.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question to clarify in my own mind the breadth of the tree ordinance as opposed to what we would want to see in our general plan update about forests. So I'll ask a question and maybe that will help you understand where my confusion is. So the tree ordinance comes into effect when there's a request for a permit to do something on your property that might affect or would affect trees. But if you aren't going to do any of that, then there is no protection for trees. And the general plan, because I've talked to Tennis Wick over the years about this, and he was hoping, I guess, or at least this is what I understood him to say, was that we were going to have a very robust forest element in this next general plan update. So am I understanding that there's a very small window for the tree ordinance to be in effect to protect trees, and that we really be needing to be concentrating and maybe there's more besides the general plan, but my understanding is that the general plan is the place to get the most robust protections for forests?
Yeah, I can take a first crack at that. Those are good questions. The general plan update process can take 5 to 7 years.
Well, it's taken 10 years and it's not even started.
Exactly. So it can take many years to start, and then from start to finish.
Right.
If there's a finish, it can take a number of years. So there are a world of possibilities of what the future general plan and general plan update can address and accomplish. I would say even then, a general plan has to be implemented by later actions, such as updates to the zoning code, which is what we're going through now, which can in and of themselves take a number of years. So
I meant to say both of those, yes.
So it's the general plan update is coming. So I've been told for the last few years. No, I think the real hope is that we can get the general plan update really started in earnest by the end of this year. But where we're at right now, we've been given the thumbs up to operate kind of within this scope, modifying existing regulations in the zoning code that address trees. So the tree protection ordinance, Valley Oak habitat, combining zone, and the introduction of a new oak woodland ordinance. And so we're operating within that at the moment. And yes, currently the tree protection ordinance, it's only really activated if there is a project on a parcel that requires a discretionary permit. But that is one of the things that the Planning Commission has directed us to change. They want to see it apply in any circumstance where a protected tree will be.
Yeah, and then to expand on Doug's response, there are also provisions in our zoning code. We have our timberland conversion ordinances, which do capture timberland conversions, as defined by CAL FIRE. And really those are a county permitting process overlaying on top of the CAL FIRE permitting process. But we do, both of those are discretionary permits at the county. So we do have some level of control over those. And then obviously if something's in the riparian corridor, so riparian forests, if it's in that particular combining zone, we have those protections. And then one of the things that we are going to talk about is really expanding oak woodland protections as well, proposing to do that. So trying to really, if someone cuts a tree in Sonoma County, trying to create what the proper permitting pathway is and when it applies, are you just working in the tree protection ordinance world where you're cutting down 1 or 2 trees for a development project? Oh, are you converting oak woodland? Oh, now you're jumping into this new permitting process and starting to create that highway. Oh, you're converting timberland. Oh, you're going into this process and trying to create a more streamlined approach to the multitude of different ways that forests can be impacted in this county. And that's our goal right now. And I think ideally as part of a general plan update, we would identify even more policies that could help implement practical actions like this in the future.
So you're working on zoning changes now, as you've said. So when the general plan update gets going, that could all be changed if even stronger policies are recommended in the general plan. Then you have to go back again to the zoning and change those to strengthen them. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's an iterative process. The zoning code is always open for amendment. The things we're looking at now, they were adopted 20 to 30 years ago or more. And so now we're revisiting them and based on existing policy. So they were adopted based on an old general plan. Now we have a new general plan we're operating under. We're changing them again. We'll have a new general plan and we may go back to them and change them yet again. So it's a bit of a
So the general plan that now you're trying to make the zoning regs fit, what is the year that was adopted?
2008.
Oh my God. Okay. It's not your fault. No blame.
No.
Get it clear. Thank you.
And then maybe Kim, if you have some questions or feedback, that'd be great. And then we'll jump into the next part just to keep an eye on time.
Can I pop in really fast? Sorry, Kim, while we're on that last point, I feel like I could be the only one. I'm really new to the kind of permitting world, but everything that you guys just said about sort of this decision tree of if it's this activity goes here, if it's that activity goes there, if it's this one, that's confusing, or it's totally new to me. And I don't know if there's a graphic that you could share with us that has some of that kind of tree, lined out, or
that'd be that's a great suggestion. It's all in my head right now. And so there is no true graphic, but that is something I think we are wanting to develop.
Sorry, Adriana, were you asking for a graphic related to how all these different planning documents work together, or what, or are you asking about how the ordinance, what it applies to?
I couldn't tell if the ordinance is the umbrella over all of those, or if those are kind of next to the ordinance.
They're more next to the ordinance. It's more depending on the activity, a different ordinance may apply. And so a good graphic would help someone determine which ordinance would apply to their tree removal activity.
Okay, yeah, that would be helpful.
And that confusion is something we want to address through the ordinance update. We want the ordinance to say very clearly, in these cases, this applies, in these cases, this applies. Help clear that up.
Just for the record, I'm going to totally blame Doug and Robert for not having a general plan.
Yeah.
With that, I was just, I'm apologize that maybe you've addressed this question already, but I'm just trying to figure out to what degree some of the veg treatments we are looking at for a variety of conditions, whether they would actually fall within the tree ordinance.
Right.
Like a shaded fuel break, you're going to be removing some trees, but it's under a different, we're using the appropriate CEQA verification. So would that fall into a different category, or would we still have to?
So as it's written now, and I think what we are planning on suggesting to the Planning Commission is a list of exemptions and exceptions, and thoughtfully done fire risk reduction projects is certainly one that we have heard consistently across stakeholders as an exemption to tree protections. As the ordinance is written right now, it really only applies to discretionary permits. And so, grant funded shaded field break wouldn't apply in the first place. So there'd be no need to. And I think we're not trying to get in the way of good, fire risk reduction projects, whether it's through this ordinance or through an oak woodland conversion ordinance or through any of our ordinances. We're not trying to get in the way of good projects that are supported by the county and the public. And so I think that's, to answer your question, that's not our plan. And that's because that's a consistent theme we've heard across stakeholders. It's not getting in the way of these fire risk reduction projects at this point.
All right, thanks.
Yeah. D, you're on mute.
You have a good ordinance that you guys have worked on, and we all love it. And then, so how does it get monitored so that we know that it is actually going to protect the trees? What are you putting something like that into the ordinance?
Yeah, so the reporting and monitoring part of it is something that we're working on, because in the future, when we are in the position we're in now, where we're saying, hey, have these things worked? Where are we now? How have they worked up to this point? We will have more information to be able to really answer that question. Because at the moment, we have very little to point to.
Yeah.
But on that, I wanted to jump into the next item just to make sure we have enough time. Let me share my screen here. And we're going to talk about an entirely different approach. Whereas the tree protection ordinance is just fundamentally permissive, and it's just a question of whether you have to mitigate or not. And a potential approach to oak woodland conservation would take a more protective approach.
So part of this project was funded through a grant that we received from the state through the Office of Planning and Research, and part of that included partnering with UC Cooperative Extension up here in Sonoma County, specifically Mike Jones. And as we were going through all of our policies, we realized that there was a gap in protecting oak woodlands. We have protections for valley oak habitat in specific soil types where valley oak applies, but we found that doesn't apply to all valley oak occurrences in the county. We have our timberland conversion, which applies to most of the West County timberlands, and as well as some of the East County timberlands. We have our riparian forests that are protected through the riparian corridor ordinance. We have individual trees that are protected through the tree protection ordinance. But general oak woodlands are just not protected, and they make up a significant component of Sonoma County's forests and character and quality. And so we brought that forward to the Planning Commission, and they recommended that we bring back a policy for oak woodland protection. And through some, spatial research that Mike Jones did, we found that about 800 acres of oak woodlands between 2013 for the Sonoma VegMap baseline in 2020, when we first did the research, was disturbed from either conversion or forest health issues, like sod on the coast or something like that.
And that's outside of wildfire perimeters.
Thank you. Yes, that's outside of the wildfire perimeters, because that's a whole nother disturbance element that we didn't want to include. And we realized that stewardship is really the best way to protect these resources. You know, the stick-based approach of regulation only goes so far, but really, you know, the carrot-based approach of incentivizing landowners to protect their forests, especially in Sonoma County, where so much of our forest is privately held, is really going to be the best way. So we're trying to develop a policy that incorporates the best of both of those worlds, you know, the regulatory approach and the incentivization approach. So we have another suite of questions. I'll put those in the chat. But if Doug, you want to go to the next slide. So I really liked how the last conversation went, where we didn't really talk about the questions specifically, but we just kind of talked about the ideas surrounding, and I think we can have a similar conversation here. But I'll just read out the questions, I'll put them in the chat, and then we can have another dialogue. So our first question is, how much of your work takes place in or near oak woodlands? Second question, the county is tasked with balancing natural resource protection and development. Are there circumstances where impacts to woodlands should be allowed? 3, are there any circumstances where mitigations should not be required? 4, what would incentivize you to protect oak woodlands? And then 5, anything else you would like the PC and the board of supervisors to know? So.
And I'll just add that as it's being developed right now, the idea of the oak woodland ordinance is that it would operate very similarly to the riparian corridor ordinance, in that it sets a definition of what this resource is, what constitutes an oak woodland, and it says in more circumstances than not, we would like to conserve this resource, while also acknowledging that there are limited circumstances where impacts, interventions are necessary, beneficial, etc. So it's the ordinance right now is trying to find that line between, you know, the question number 2, where should that line be? Where are impacts to woodlands acceptable or beneficial? And when should they ideally be, you know, left alone, left in the ground, etc.
I feel like, again, this is a general plan question, right? Like, we need to, I think the only thing I can really think of where it would be like, yeah, oak woodland conversion, great, is housing. You know what I mean? Like, that's like, I don't want to be draconian about it, because it is just so hard to find a place to live in Sonoma County. And so that's really, that like is glaring to me, that I just think that there should be, and it sounds like you're already talking about zoning designations, right? So like, where is your oak woodland zoning versus where is potential and like high priority housing, you know, areas going to be? And hopefully the way that the county is looking at it, and just knowing that these plans are going to be for like 20 years when they're done, is that they're focusing on infilling and maybe carving out a few places where there could also be outside the current infill boundary. But yeah, I mean, like, to me, the biggest things right now are actually water, you know, water use conversion. And that goes outside of like oak woodlands to oak savanna, or to grasslands, or to wetlands. And so other things that aren't even necessarily tree ordinances, right? But I just don't see people going out and about with a chainsaw and just cutting down their big old heritage trees willy-nilly. It's usually that they're trying to build something. So
I have a question, and this is like a very uninformed question, but is there any kind of effort to retain oak trees in new vineyard development, to sort of like insist that new vineyards keep certain large oak trees, or make space for oak trees inside the vineyard?
I don't believe explicitly in Vesco that there is.
I don't think that they're compatible.
Specific tree protections. There are, if you are removing a certain amount of trees or tree canopy, my understanding of Vesco, and that's the Ag Commissioner's ordinance, it's not really Permit Sonoma's ordinance, so forgive me for not being fully versed in it, is if you have to remove a certain amount of trees, you enter into this new permitting threshold. And so it goes from being I think what's called like a level 1 permit into a level 2 permit, where then at that point you need engineering, more engineered drawings and calculations. But, the ag commissioner office has told us, VESCO is not a tree protection ordinance. It's a soil, like erosion ordinance is really what it is. And so that's how that ordinance is really written. Whereas if you're removing tree canopy, you need to have your vineyard designed in such a way so as to not, be increasing soil erosion that would otherwise be mitigated by having trees in place. And so, no, is my understanding is that there's not really major protections in VESCO right now, at least.
Yeah, but I just don't even see that being a compatible use, right? Like if you're going to have a tree in the middle of a vineyard, what is it even really? Is it a woodland?
Right.
Right. Like, is this serving any of the beneficial uses of woodland having that there? And then you're going to irrigate under oak trees. So basically you've just like sentenced this thing to rot.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's just not. At that point, it's an agricultural operation, right? And so I think the bigger question needs to be where, and this isn't a tree ordinance question, this is a general planning question. How much more vineyard are we going to permit? And, and I like drinking wine, right? So I'm not like anti-vineyard, but I do think that really at the end of the day becomes the question. And realistically, where my mind goes is like in these systems, the limiting factor is water. These are water limited ecosystems. And so that's the biggest concern that I have. It isn't even necessarily like individual standing trees. It's how much are we sucking out of the groundwater?
Yeah.
So, working to figure out groundwater storage, to figure out and spend more money on rainwater catchment and having that be part of the permitting process to have new vineyards is like figuring out how to limit water use and water rights. To me seems like a bigger issue one. But yeah, I think it's, from my perspective, just as a forester working mostly on like fuels reduction, but occasionally like there's thinning needs for improving oaks and their growth rates and meeting whatever objectives it is that we're trying to do, right? I would kind of like to be left alone, but but yeah, I see conversion as being the biggest thing, and there is a permitting process for conversion, and so focusing in on that, I think would be good from an individual tree standpoint. And then really, this is just a bigger societal conversation of how do we have places for people to live, places for agricultural operations so that we have jobs, right? And that we have an economy in this area that's dependent on these things. And then also making sure that we have enough water for people, for fish, for the trees, for the wildlife, for living things need water. So that to me seems like a bigger question than a tree ordinance. That really feels like a zoning designation. And then also just like sticking to it. Because I'm not involved in any of these things. I just see it out there. But sometimes you see certain vineyards that are getting put in and you're just like, how did they permit that? You know what I mean? Like, and how much money makes all the doors open? Like that's not involved. So I have no idea. But like sometimes I get that thought, let's be nice, you know? So like, I don't know, kind of like sticking to it and being kind of draconian about where we are dealing with water rights, because
Ray Krause,
the number one issue. Yeah.
Can I ask a question here? Hello?
Yeah, go ahead, Ray.
Are there any regulations on the removal of oak woodland in replacement with vineyard? If there's no protection in VESCO and VESCO is the only permit that's required to develop vineyard, then I mean, it seems to me that the vast loss of oak woodland in the county has been to vineyard development. And is there any appetite to, if it's not under any kind of control now, is there any appetite to bring it under any control?
That's what we're trying to, that's what we're proposing.
Yeah, that's the topic at
With
hand.
developing some type of conversion based ordinance, similar to our timberland conversions, but applying it to oak woodlands.
It would
is-
seem as soon as you're cutting trees to plant vineyard, it should become a discretionary permit and no longer subject to VESCO, but to discretionary approval.
Yeah, so the way VESCO works right now is it does go through a quick review at our department, where if it's impacting timberland, or so if they're converting timberland, they will have to get one of our timberland conversion permits, which are discretionary. And then if it's in the Valley Oak Habitat combining zone, which is again a very small subset of actual where valley oaks occur, it will be subject to those provisions, or if it's, in a riparian corridor. So if it has a planning nexus, our zoning code will apply. And that's really what we think could work with a oak woodland conversion ordinance, where if we have a zoning code that says, oak woodland conversion is prohibited, except, in these certain circumstances, and, you want to do it, then you need this certain type of permit. So that is, yeah, right. That's definitely something that we're trying to propose at this point.
Okay, that seems essential because that's where we've lost our oak woodland. Thank you.
Thanks for your questions and comments, Ray. Yeah, I think one way of thinking about this, conceptually, there's timberland conversion ordinances, and they don't address oak woodlands. And so one way of thinking about this is that it's a companion to that, or helps fill in some of the gaps.
Yeah.
Similar kind of thinking.
Yeah. I think another option that we're looking at, I mentioned incentive-based approaches, and, we don't want to get in the way of conservation-based projects that may have some element of oak woodland loss incorporated into it, so I think we're trying to explore ways that we can include, if someone has, I don't know, like some type of forest management plan, or other type of, habitat conservation plan, or some other type of, conservation-based document that that establishes guidance over their property, that, the language I'm thinking about would say like no net loss of oak woodlands, or something like that, or like no net loss of whatever, however we end up defining services, ecosystem services, or something like that. If we can include something like that like allows loss to a point, but like shows that over time it's not going to lose, that might be a way to incentivize landowners to get those types of documents and those types of plans on their property that do establish good objectives. So that way they can, put that house on their property, or, put in that hobby vineyard they want to do, or have that whatever operation it is, but it shows that there's no net loss. And I think, that's something we're just trying to workshop right now. That's something that we've been hearing as well, in our conversations with others. I think Jason Wells has talked to us about that a lot, about, incentivizing landowners is really the best way to encourage conservation. And so, yeah, just wanted to put that out there as well. If anyone has any ideas, try to make that policy language, love to hear it.
Trenton Williams here. I'd like to just put an idea out there, in line with what Jason was saying about water, and back what we were saying about misinformation or lack of information in the public, and the policymakers, is that we look around and we wonder why, we don't have water. And then we look back and we think, well, we cut all our trees down. Some of these trees pull water out of the air, and some of these trees pull water up from the soil, when they're stressed. And when you get rid of that balance, and you start, well, look, where's my water at? It's like, well, you don't have the plants that do those purposes, and coming from my background, that's what we focus on, is like using the tools and the resources we have here to get what we need out of them. So if you keep putting in plants that just suck up water and never get anything back, it's like, what do you expect, Anyways, I just want to put that out there.
Yeah, thank you.
I appreciate that. And I think Eric was asking the question earlier, or making the point about, how do these ordinances address the broad spectrum of ecosystem services and values that are inherent in these ecosystems? And the tree protection ordinance doesn't really do that. Our hope is that by the oak woodland ordinance emphasizing keeping trees in the ground largely, and their associated habitats and vegetation that that the ordinance can, in a way, acknowledge that there are significant depth of ecosystem services inherent in these landscapes, and that it's really not. We're moving away as a county. Maybe this is I hope statement, but I think that we're moving away from, and in the drafts that we've produced thus far, we're moving away from a mitigation dependent approach, acknowledging the limitations of what mitigation can achieve, and that we can no longer operate on the idea that, oh yeah, you can take it out because you'll just replace it, right? Yeah, no. If we're talking just for conceptual, 200, 300-year-old tree, it's not as simple as putting in a sapling. And at the same time, we hope that the ordinance can acknowledge the importance of generations of forest, and just be a bit more, hopefully support the nuance in some of the things we've talked about here.
Thank you. Seeing that we're at the end of the hour, and I know we have one more comment, but I just wanted to ask if there's some way we can follow up with you guys, stay in touch with this process, maybe review draft language, or maybe you can teach us how to understand where things are and then give us the draft language.
Yeah. I'm going to put our emails in the chat. So if you need to get a hold of us or would like to, you are welcome to send comments our way. We are publicly searchable as county employees. Yeah, Doug, do you want to just quickly show what like our next steps is? Actually, you don't have to. So our next steps, we have a public survey that we're working on that's going to go out, sort of like broadcast through however the county sends out public surveys. We have a website on our Permit Sonoma website. We have a web page about updates to the tree ordinance. Hasn't been updated in a while since our last planning commission meetings because we haven't really had much to update about because we've been doing these stakeholder interviews. So really what's happening next, we're going to send out a public survey. We're going to consolidate the results of that and these interviews that we've been doing. I think we're going to try to get another setup of like second round stakeholder interviews once we've drafted some policy and be like, here's what we've heard. Here's what we did. What do you think about it? And then we're going to go to the planning commission. That's our next step. We don't have a date yet. I think we're shooting for spring or early summer. Is that right, Doug?
Yeah. Big picture, spring, early summer to go to the planning commission. But yeah, like Robert said, it'd be great if we're able before that to have a discussion where we're looking at the draft language and we can explore the devil's in the details kind of issues.
Yeah. And then eventually the goal will be to go to the board of supervisors this year is the goal. So
yeah, right now we're scheduled for something like November and possibly earlier. So
yeah,
but then yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, we really, it's very important for us to be talking and that you come and join our merry band. So thank you.
Yes. And I would also encourage you all as we start having hearings and board dates, please show up, make your voices heard, comment, send in comments however you can. Because that's, like I was saying earlier, that's what like makes the best process for
Absolutely.
us. So.
And it does matter. And I just want to say too, when you log out of this and something strikes you in the middle of the afternoon or something we didn't get to address here, like that's what we're here for. Please reach out. Don't hesitate. These conversations are where the good stuff happens. So reach out. Thank you.
Okay, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone. All right.
Have a good day.
We'll stay in touch and we'll see you next time.
Thanks,
Bye.
Adriana.
Thanks, Adriana.
Thank you.